All right. So what we got going on here, we're going to try and do the screencasts for Chapter 2, Legal and Ethical Issues. What we have here, we've got a bunch of different words: scope, care, competence, consent, advanced directives, refusals, assault and battery, abandonment, negligence, confidentiality, special situations, crime scene, and documentation. All right. So we got to start somewhere. So let's start with different legal aspects. All right. We have a misunderstood concept called duty to act. Duty to act is a legal requirement while on paid duty. You've got to be paid to have a duty to act. If you're a volunteer firefighter and you worked a real long day and there's a fire and you just can't get yourself to get out of bed in the morning to go fight this fire, nobody's going to come sue you. However, if you are a paid firefighter and you're at the fire station and the alarm goes off and you just don't go, you have breached your legal duty. You've breached your legal duty. It's a legal requirement while you're on paid duty. You are paid by the people of wherever it is that you're at to respond. All right, now, something else that helps to protect us in the state of Louisiana is our Good Samaritan laws. The Good Samaritan laws are laws designed to take care of the people who stop and respond and help people out. If you're just doing something purely out of the goodness of your heart, you are not getting paid anything to do it, then you're covered by the Good Samaritan laws as far as the state of Louisiana is concerned. And it helps to keep you from getting sued for trying to help somebody. All right, now here we go. Legals. All right, legal duties. First thing, and this is very important, is what's called our scope of practice. Our scope of practice is what we are legally allowed to do according to state laws, basically. So for a first responder, everything you learn in this class is considered to be scope of practice. Because we are licensed individuals in the state of Louisiana. So what we can do is within our scope of practice. All right, now the next thing that we have is our standard of care. Standard of care is what is generally expected of individuals trained or licensed at a particular level. Standard of care is kind of a statewide thing. Ideally, what we do in Livingston is the same thing as what gets done in Shreveport by first responders. So that standard of care is important, and adhering to that standard of care is important as well. Now, these are all legal terms. Ethics are not necessarily legal terms, but they can be. But in general, there's no hard and fast rule that if it's legal, it's ethical, and if it's ethical, it's legal. Some good explanations of that might be something like, I don't know, shooting somebody. All right, you got somebody outside your house. Ethically, you might find it completely within your set of ethics to shoot somebody who's trying to break into your house. But the law might disagree with that. So that might be a case where something would be ethical but illegal. An example where something might be legal but unethical is selling people timeshares when you know that they can't afford it. It's legal, but it's not necessarily something that somebody would do if they're a good person. All right, so what makes up our scope of care? We've got four categories here. We've got protocols, we've got state law, we've got training, and we've got physician's orders and medical direction. That's really what makes up our scope of care. Now, what makes up our ethical responsibility is a little bit different. All these different things around the outside here All are contributing factors to our ethical responsibilities. We need to be masters of our skills. We need to know what our patients' needs are. We need to make sure that we're doing those refresher programs every 2 years. We're going through performance reviews. We're being honest in our documentation, our reporting. We're keeping up with our continuing education. Those are all ethical responsibilities that a first responder in the state of Louisiana has. But right here sums up ethics. Ethics is behavior that is right, good, and proper. Ethics is the right thing to do. Another way I've heard ethics described is ethics is what you do when nobody's looking. And that's really and truly what ethics is. All right, now in your little section there on documentation, you'll see I took a screenshot of this video, but this video is also uploaded to your Google Classroom. I want you to watch that video. Then I want you to comment about what you saw and tell me if what happened there was ethical or not. And if it was ethical, why? And if it was unethical, I want to know. All right, consent. Consent is one of those things. It can be interesting and it can be challenging, but in reality, it's pretty simple. You have express consent and you have implied consent. Express consent is when somebody says, yes, you can take care of me, or you start treating them and they just don't pull away. They're not saying no specifically. Implied consent happens in cases where people are not mentally of the capacity to do what would be the smart thing to do, like take care of somebody, take care of a 3-year-old. A 3-year-old does not have legal standing to say, yes, I want this done to me, or no, I don't want this done to me. A drunk man, an intoxicated person, somebody on drugs, somebody with a serious head injury, some elderly people are not of the place where they can say for sure, yeah, this is a good thing to have happen to me, or this is a bad thing to have happen to me. So because of that, we need to establish competence. For somebody to give expressed consent, to say, yes, you can take care of me, I'm hurt, take care of me. That is expressed consent. Implied consent applies to all those other cases where the common sense thing to do is take care of this person. However, common sense does not always enter into this equation, and this is why right here. It is federal law, and it's part of the HIPAA law. I have the right to refuse care just because I want to, and I can stop care at any time because I want to. That is federal law. We have the right to determine what care we shall or shall not receive. We are allowed to refuse care at any time. So now, we can go through this pretty quick because I described it. Express consent, they're given a verbal order, or they're just not keeping you from getting care taken care of you. Implied consent is what we would do for somebody that we think would say yes under an appropriate situation. All right, refusals. Refusals are interesting. Refusals are a little change that we've had in Louisiana law over the last couple of years, and I'll explain it here in a second. All right, refusals. Competent adult patients have the right to refuse emergency medical care at any time. That has not changed. The first responder should not make an independent decision regarding the refusal of care. Patient must be informed of the risks and fully understand all the risks and consequences. And when in doubt, err in favor of providing care. All right. It used to be the law in the state of Louisiana was that a first responder could not accept a refusal of care from a patient. First responder had to stay there until an EMT arrived on scene. Well, it has occurred to some people in law. Let's say you're out in the middle of Calcasieu Parish in the middle of the woods. You're a first responder. You come upon somebody that fell off their motorbike and they say they're okay. The way the law read was a first responder who finds somebody injured has to stay with them until a higher level of care arrives. EMT, paramedic, EMT intermediate, something like that. Physician, nurse, and all that. Nurse, athletic trainer, all those things don't figure into this. That's what the law said, was a first responder could not accept a refusal. That has been changed, because if I'm sitting in the middle of the swamp in Calcasieu Parish with this guy erect his four-wheeler and is fine and can walk around, there's no reason to sit there until an EMT arrives on scene so that the EMT can fill out the refusal form. So we are allowed to do refusals in the state of Louisiana as first responders, but that brings us to an interesting little quandary. And this is not it. I'll come back to this in a second. This is it. Abandonment is terminating care of the patient without ensuring that care will continue at the same level or higher. Some people will tell you abandonment is the number one cause of EMS lawsuits in the United States. Those people are wrong. The number one cause of EMS lawsuits in this state, in any state, is negligence. Abandonment and negligence are two totally separate things. Abandonment means you found your patient, you started taking care of your patient, and then you left your patient. Abandonment's one of those things we teach it in EMS classes. Have I ever known in my 20-some years of teaching these EMS classes of somebody that ran into a problem with abandonment? And the answer is no. No, I haven't. However, I have heard of people run into problems with what's called negligence, and negligence is further down here. Let me find it. There it is. Negligence is more of an issue. Negligence is a deviation from the accepted standard of care resulting in further injury to the patient. Now, for negligence to occur, there are 4 legal tests that have to happen. 1, you have to have a duty to act. The emergency medical responder has a duty to provide care. If I'm a volunteer firefighter and I'm not on duty, they have to prove that I have a duty to act to get negligence. Therefore, there's been lots of lawsuits over the years that have gone out against volunteer fire companies. They had one in Holden a couple of years ago. Some guy was swinging on the rope there, not at Courtney Bridge, but the other bridge there, the bridge there by John Schneider's, by Singing Waters. It's the reason why that rope's not there anymore. Somebody lit the rope on fire, and the fire department let it burn down, and this is why. Somebody was swinging on the rope. Somebody did a header into the creek. The fire department went down there, put the person on a spine board, carried them up, got them in the ambulance, and took them and had them had help to Acadian to transport them. This person broke their neck and suffered some damage. This person tried to sue the volunteer fire department based on the fact what they were saying was the fire department improperly put them on the spine board, so that's what actually caused this damage to happen. And they tried to sue the fire department. Well, part of the problem was this right here, duty to act. Since they were a volunteer organization, they did not have a legal duty to provide care because they had no duty to act. They were just there to try and help. That's what actually got the lawsuit thrown out of court. So something to be aware of. Now, breach of duty. Breach of duty, you could get more in trouble with this if you're a volunteer firefighter, but care was not provided an acceptable standard. If you're a first responder and you know if we have a fracture, we need to put a splint on it, and you decide, we'll just wait for Acadian to put a splint on it, or we'll just transport him without putting a splint on it, he'll be fine. You've actually breached your duty at that point because you knew what you were supposed to do and you chose not to do it. So All right, now the other thing that they have to do is they have to prove damages. They have to prove the patient was injured in some way as a result of either improper care or lack of care. So what has to happen is they got to have a duty to act. Somebody has to breach their duty. It has to actually cause documentable damage right here. I can't make my finger do it. Documentable damage right there. See? There has to be documentable damage right there that the person's breach of duty caused that to happen, and they have to prove that the cause of the damage was because of the breach of duty. So most of your lawsuits against EMS right now are not in any way related to abandonment, even though that they say they are related to negligence. All right, going back up here to where we left off. And we were talking about refusals. So because of all that stuff, because of abandonment and because of negligence, I would be very careful obtaining a refusal on any patient. We can do it now legally, but personally, from a legal standpoint, I would wait for the ambulance to arrive and let them take the legal liability. All right, now we're going to talk about assault and battery here. All right, assault and battery. Assault and battery is unlawfully touching a patient without consent, providing emergency medical care when a competent patient does not consent to the emergency medical care. If you grab a hold of somebody and start treating them, and they say, "Hey, what are you doing? Stop," you have to stop. Otherwise, you can be guilty of assault and battery. Now, one of the interesting things is about Louisiana law. I just learned this year. Assault and battery in most states, because they're based in English common law, what assault is actually making a person feel like they are in danger. So if I all of a sudden just get right in your face and I start screaming and I'm going to beat the crap out of you, at that point, I've actually committed an assault. Then when I actually do beat the crap out of you and I punch you, that's when the battery has happened. That is most states. State of Louisiana, it's actually flipped because we've got French common law, not English common law. The battery is me threatening you. The assault is me touching you. But either way, you can be charged with this if you treat patients that don't want to be treated. So just don't treat patients that don't want to be treated. All right, children and mentally incompetent adults. This can also include intoxicated adults. Consent must be obtained from the parent or legal guardian. When they say mentally incompetent, the legal guardian is going to be whoever's in charge of this person. All right, back to this because I keep getting interrupted by people. Consent for mentally incompetent adults. That is generally your people who are older, disabled, have some kind of basically a mental retardation condition. It's been medically diagnosed as that. They have a guardian that watches out for them and decides what is good for them or what is not good for them. When you're dealing with that patient, we provide care based on what a good, intelligent person would want for that person. And that is going to be implied consent. All right, advanced directive. Advanced directives are also called DNR orders. Back in the day, they used to call them living wills. We're kind of getting away from calling them living wills. I haven't heard anything called a living will in a very long time. So we call them advanced directives, but mostly in this area, they're called DNRs. A patient has the right to receive resuscitative efforts, requires a written order from a physician. This is a copy of a DNR. This is kind of a standard DNR. They come actually in a tablet. Same form over and over again at the doctor's office.
Dr. Stodner, please call the front office, please. Dr. Stodner.
And the patient fills this out, and they have choices what they can get, what they want. They can say they do not want any kind of CPR or advanced life support at all, or they can pick what they want. Well, it'd be okay if they gave me oxygen. It'd be okay if they put a defibrillator on me, but don't do CPR on me. It's up to the patient, and they fill the patient's name in here. This right here is critical. A lot of people in this area have DNRs that don't have a physician's signature on them, or the date on them is expired. DNRs are only good for 6 months. Every 6 months, they have to be renewed. All right. So if somebody hands you a DNR that's out of expiration date, you're still supposed to legally provide, if it's expired, you're supposed to legally provide CPR. So that's something for us to think about, especially as our folks get older. If they decide they want to have a DNR, that's their choice. It's up to them to make a decision, but it needs to be updated every 6 months. So what happens if you go to a patient's house and they hand you an expired DNR? What should you do? The reality of the situation is you should try and attempt to resuscitate that patient. What if you have one family member says, don't resuscitate them, and another family member says, oh, you need to resuscitate them? What do we do in that case? That's when we ask, do we have a DNR? If there is a DNR, the next question is, they say, yeah, we have a DNR. Next question is, can I see the DNR? Unless they can provide you with the actual paper copy of the DNR, you should provide CPR to that patient and resuscitate that patient. All right, patient confidentiality. Patient's information is protected. Private information should stay private. Now, the question is always who gets information about the patient. This right here. Their information is protected. All right. So who can get information about this patient? Anybody who is a healthcare giver, anybody that's paying for it, they can generally get that information. So you're the EMT, you've got this patient in the car. Can I tell my paramedic supervisor over here what's going on? Absolutely, I can. Can he tell the emergency room what's going on? Absolutely, he can. So they can do that. We can share information about the patient through healthcare providers. That just makes sense. You want that for continuity of care. What about insurance companies? Can we share information with insurance companies? Absolutely, we can, because they're the ones paying for it. So we can share information with insurance companies as well. That is the people that you can share information with. What about family members? Unless the patient is a minor, unless we have specific permission from the patient, we really probably should not share information with family members. What about Joe down the street? Joe down the street doesn't need to know this person's personal medical business. Livingston is not a large town. It's always interesting whenever you land a chopper in the middle of Livingston for somebody's medical issue. Because being a firefighter, the first thing that every bystander is going to come up to, one, they're going to see a helicopter land and they're going to be nosy. Two, the next thing they're going to ask is, well, what should...
Dr. Stodner, please call the front office. Dr. Stodner, please call the front office.
The next thing they're going to ask is, well, what's wrong with this person? Because it's not a big town. Everybody knows where everybody lives. Everybody sees a fire truck, ambulance outside their house. And people are concerned. So what should you say as an EMR, as a firefighter, as a first responder? Basically, I've found over the years something that people will accept and not ask you 15 more questions is this is a trauma patient or this is a medical patient. You tell them that and they're okay. If it's a trauma patient, they can see the crash with their own eyes. They know it's a trauma patient. If they're having a heart attack, you can tell them we've got a medical patient. You don't need to tell them it's Joe Smith. You don't need to tell them that Joe Smith is having a heart attack. All we got to do is tell that bystander, oh, that's a medical patient. And that usually keeps them happy and out of your hair. So, all right. Releasing confidential information. We talked a little bit about that. You can release information if a written release form is signed by the patient. You can share with other medical professionals. It cannot be shared with the family, friends, and bystanders at the scene. Most of the time they can kind of figure it out, but generally, strictly with HIPAA, you're not supposed to share with family members. Well, I don't think it's usually a problem, but just think about that. There's an old saying, keep private things private, and that sums up HIPAA. Keep your private information private. If somebody subpoenas you, comes and brings you a court order, then yeah, you can release patient information then, but not until. All right. Medical identification insignias indicates a medical condition of the patient. This is also called medical alert jewelry. And there's all kind of different stuff. We've got watches and pendants and charm bracelets and just about any kind of medical alert information there is. It's available. Wallet cards is another thing. These indicate some kind of medical information of the patient. And when we're first taking care of a patient, it's a good idea to look for this kind of stuff, because this kind of stuff could clue you into what their medical condition is. Now, something you need to think about. This is a Livingston Parish solution to this problem. A person has a medical problem. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to tattoo diabetic on my wrist. So then when the paramedics come and look at me, they'll know I'm a diabetic. That's a stupid idea. I'm going to tell you why. I never in my entire EMS career have read somebody's tattoos. The other thing that happens is when people get old, their tattoos, the lines kind of fade out on them and they become hard to read. So a lot of these tattoos that people get, oh, I'm going to get diabetic tattooed on my arm. I'm not paying any attention to that because I'm not trained to look for that. And the other thing is it's not standardized. So you, Jim Bob, get allergic to penicillin tattooed on your elbow. I'm never going to see that. I'm going to miss that. If you truly have a medical condition, you need to have some kind of medical alert information like this. Don't get it tattooed on you. It won't help you any, and if anything, it's just going to give people more information about you than you want to give out. All right, crime scenes. Emergency medical care of the patient is first responder's priority. Even before that, your number one priority at a crime scene is scene safety. I don't even go in unless I'm sure the scene is safe. That is made safe by these guys right here, the Blue Canaries, the police officers. They're the ones that go in to see what's deadly. Once they figure it out that there's nothing deadly, then EMS can roll into the scene. Once we roll into the scene, now it's a crime scene. The police officers will let you know if it's a crime scene. All right. Do not disturb any item at the scene unless emergency medical care requires it. Don't just start rearranging the room because you need more room to do CPR or something like that. If you do move anything, make sure you tell the person in charge of the crime scene that you moved it. If somebody has a bullet hole and you go to cut off their clothes because you got to look at the area where the wound is, see if it was an exit wound. Don't cut right through bullet holes. cut around the bullet holes because they can get a lot of forensic information from the bullet hole, but if you cut it up, they won't. So we just need to be careful around crime scenes. Observe and document anything unusual at the scene. You probably in your documentation want to say something about the fact that it is a crime scene. If you moved anything, put it in your notes as well as telling them. And the biggest thing is just be safe because these crime scenes can get hairy in a hurry. All right, some fundamentals about documentation. And we have a little documentation lab for you to do. That's going to be an assignment. Use permanent black or blue ink, no felt pens or pencils. Felt pens are hard to read. Pencils can be erased. So we're going to use black or blue ink. Ideally, we want to use blue ink because blue ink, we can tell if it's the original document. Black photocopies to black. So we might not know if document's original or not. Write legibly. Print if your handwriting is not legible. If your handwriting is not legible, print it out. Or type it. Typing's even better. If we're going to be doing big activities, we might want to use forms or checklists. If you look at the sample Livingston Parish Run report that I gave you, that has checklists on it. And that allows us to do what we got to do to these patients. Date, time, and sign all entries with your name and professional designation. All entries should be in chronological order. All entries should go by date and time. And when you sign it, you can sign your name, your signature, comma, EMR. That tells everybody that you're an emergency medical responder. Use only standard abbreviations. Since you guys have a very limited grasp of medical terminology at this point, I wouldn't abbreviate anything except for maybe like street or boulevard. All right. Do not skip lines or leave blank spaces between entries because somebody with bad intent could come back in and fill something in. And we don't want that. Late entries should be recorded as such. If you do your documentation and you remember something later and you want to add it, we want to go in after and write late entry or the time. And I forgot to include this in the first report and things like that. Never, ever, 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 ever use liquid paper on your formal reports. Incorrect entries should be corrected by drawing a single straight line through the mistake. Write error above the line with your initials, then write the correct word or statement. All right? Because if you start putting whiteout on government forms, some lawyer, when this goes to court, and it can go to court, will first attack you because, well, what were you trying to cover up or hide because you used whiteout? Don't do it. Just draw a line through it, initial it, write error, and then write in what you want to write. Do not alter or update existing medical record documentation or destroy or withhold elements of a medical record after an untoward event occurs or a legal claim is filed. What this whole paragraph means is always document exactly what happened, even if it was bad, and don't withhold medical records that you've kept because that makes you look like you're trying to hide something. In a court of law, you're better off having an error that you committed showing up in your documentation than you trying to hide that error because you're afraid you're going to get in trouble. Because if you try to hide that error and you're afraid that you're going to get in trouble and they find out, now you've just lied on a legal document, which looks worse. Obviously, trying to lie on a legal document because that's a mistake, but that's a big mistake. That's a lot bigger mistake than accidentally doing something incorrectly or missing something. So special situations for documentation: child abuse, elderly abuse, spouse abuse. One of the things about these different abuses right here, in the state of Louisiana, you are what is called a mandatory reporter. mandatory reporter. A mandatory reporter. You are required by law in cases of reported abuse to report it. You are required to report child abuse, elder abuse, or spouse abuse to your immediate supervisor as well as law enforcement. Now, I would start by reporting to your immediate supervisor because they can tell you what law enforcement to report it to. But you are a mandatory reporter. You are required to do this. Crime, sexual assault. Those are also things that might require special documentation because crimes are going to court. So you might need to be extra special good in your needs at this point. Exposure to infectious diseases needs to be documented well. You encounter a COVID patient, you need to have good documentation on that. So, all right. So that is my screencast for this section. If you have questions, email me. If you have questions, talk to me in class. But there's a lot of information in this chapter. I would recommend you watch this screencast a couple times to be sure that you get everything. So, all right. Take it easy, y'all. Bye.